Hello everybody and welcome back to another edition of KerVAM, and as you can see, if you're watching on YouTube at least, for the first time we are in vision. I'm joined by Ryan and Charlie to discuss the Season 17 box set. That's our main focus in this week's podcast. The Blu-Ray which was released just before Christmas, and we're going to be diving deep into some interesting stories and some really good, I think, special features from the Blu-Ray box set, as well as discussing the news of the possible end of the animation range for Doctor Who, and a possible collection box set that may have leaked already as to what's going to be coming out next. So you'll also be able to hear later what the next Blu-ray box set is most likely to be. But first, Ryan, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well, Elliot. Thank you very much for asking. I can't wait to dive into more of the infamous Season 17 and all of its many joyous goodies on display, and as well as discussing what is actually kind of worrying news about the animation, but I'm pretty sure we'll have more to discuss as we go along.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, Charlie, are you as disparaging of Season 17 as Ryan is? Do you think it's quite as concerning a season?
I don't know. I don't think it's the worst season ever. I do think there are worse in Doctor Who. It's certainly not amazing though. Like I remember I said before that I preferred it to Season 18. More updated opinion, I don't.
Well, I look forward to discussing that more. And I should just say this: Bill isn't joining us for this edition of the podcast. He's I think a bit worn out, so he'll be joining, but he will be back again for the next podcast, and we'll hear his Season 17 thoughts in a couple of weeks. But yeah, let's just dive straight into it. Season 17. It's a season which, I think you guys have covered, is not very highly regarded. It's the final season of the Graham Williams era of Doctor Who. It's the final season of 1970s Doctor Who, although I think it ends just about in 1980, doesn't it? With Haunted Nightmare was over the festive period at the end of 79 into 80. And it's a funny old season because I feel like you've got City of Death, that generally would we say is probably a great Doctor Who story. Would we all say it's a pretty good Doctor Who story?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's really good.
Yeah, honestly, I do love it when Douglas Adams writes stories. They're always the highlight of the season, probably.
Absolutely. And see, you've got that, but then you've got this sort of slightly dodgy set of episodes to go with it, with Destiny of the Daleks, Creature from the Pit, Nightmare of Eden, Horns of Nimon. I know we've got Sharda, but it's part of Season 17, but it's also kind of separate because it was never made and it's half animated and all that. So, Ryan, we've chatted a little bit about Season 17 in the past podcast, especially Creature from the Pit and the infamous Erato. Well, firstly, have you with the new box set, have you watched many of the Season 17 stories on the box set?
Yes, I actually did revisit all the stories, which again
impressive.
Quite an experience, shall say. I will agree with Charlie. It's definitely not the worst series.
Okay.
And honestly, watching it after the mess that was Doctor Who Flux, this was kind of a little bit of a welcome relief, which is surprising to say. I will say, yes, I wouldn't say Season 17 is a great, but yeah, I kind of love it in a very strange way. It's weird because I think if you watch it, don't take it seriously as a Doctor Who series, but watch it as a children's family show about this weird, eccentric scientist who can somehow travel through time and space and thinks he's the savior of the universe. It is an absolute delight from beginning to end. And it's in a way, it's a bit of a special series for me because my dad has an absolute ball with this series. Every time he watches it, it always puts a smile on his face. And I think it's because of how so weird and bizarre it is, and I think it pretty much sets the tone right at the very beginning. Those first 5 minutes of Destiny of the Daleks perfectly sums up the Season 17 in a nutshell. You have K9 suffering from laryngitis for some reason, even though he's a robot, and then you have Romana coming in. She's suddenly changed. She's not Mary Tam anymore. All of a sudden she looks like Princess Astra from the previous story, and then she tries on different outfits, like as if she's trying on different clothes. And so she's like, I think I'll just look like Lala Ward for some reason. And then just immediately after that, they're just like, we shall see where we are. And they open the TARDIS window, scan or whatever, and Tom Baker's like, oh, look, rocks. And they just shut the door. And I think all that just perfectly sums up what's to come, really. as far as the stories are concerned, Destiny of the Daleks, it is hilarious if you don't take it seriously, but if you take it seriously, it is a pretty lousy follow-up from Genesis of the Daleks.
Yeah.
I mean, because Genesis of the Daleks was so brilliant, there's no way it could have matched up to that, especially when you got tatty Daleks and an even tatty-looking Davros bobbing up and down as if he's like a rubber duck in a bathtub. You have great... actually, well, City of Death is great. I mean, obviously, Douglas Adams, that's his masterpiece. There's no denying that. It is really good. Creature from the Pit, well, I've pretty much said my piece on it. What else is there to say but Erato?
Indeed.
Oh boy, Erato.
Indeed. Yes.
Nightmare of Eden. It's not a bad idea, but I just feel like it's kind of not very well executed, and I find the behind the scenes drama more entertaining than the actual story itself. Horns and Nymon, again, it's just basically, it's kind of a serious story just taken absolute for laughs by Graham Crowden going Lord Nymon and all that, and about proclaiming about his big dreams of conquest and all that.
Indeed.
Absolutely hilarious. And I guess I might as well include Sharda.
Yeah.
I do really enjoy Sharda. I think, especially now that we've got the updated version of Sharda, which is now called the definitive version.
I know, and it's ruined our old podcast about Sharda, hasn't it? That was meant to be an all-encompassing Sharda podcast, and now it's out of date.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if they listened to our podcast and be like, let's try and release another version.
Yeah, exactly.
And I still really enjoy Sharda. It is good fun, even though it's not as more tightly constructed like, say, City of Death and even Pirate Planet. It's still a solid watch, and I think if this was fully done, I think it would have been a much better end to the season than, say, Hordes of Nymon was, which is, well, but then again, anything could be better than Hordes of Nymon. So, yeah, as I said, it is an absolute hilariously bad season, but yet I think it's entertaining for how hilariously bad it is. If you want to have a good old time, I'd say watch it, because even if you're down, it will definitely cheer you up. I don't think you'll ever find a dull moment in it, but if you're taking it seriously as a Doctor Who, it is kind of rough, I suppose, and maybe Tom's worst season. I don't know, it's either that or season 15.
Yeah, that's the question, isn't it? I can't really decide which one I prefer. I think you're right, though, that you kind of have to enjoy it for the comedy aspect, the Douglas Adams aspect, essentially, in this season, because you can really enjoy it if you kind of embrace the comedy that a lot of it's been played for. I mean, sometimes you have to laugh at stuff which they didn't intend to be funny, aka Erato, and that can, I guess, enhance your enjoyment of the season. Like, sure, it's no gritty, dark, Resurrection of the Daleks or Deadly Assassin or Talons of Weng-Chiang. Like, it's nothing like that sort of era of Doctor Who, any of those, but actually it can be thoroughly enjoyable. I think you've always just got to kind of say this is the comedy version of Doctor Who rather than the serious version of Doctor Who, and then I think you're in a better place. Yeah, but Charlie, what would you say is apart from City of Death, are there any other real highlights in season 17?
Well, I used to be a lot kinder to season 17 than I am now.
Yes, I remember a few months ago we were talking about it, and you were like, as you said, you preferred it to season 18. That opinion is now gone.
Yeah, I did rewatch both seasons, and I do prefer season 18 by quite a bit, actually. Season 17, I feel if you watch this as, like, for example, if you watch Austin Powers, you don't expect a good spy film, do you? You expect, that. So it's kind of like season 17 and the rest of Doctor Who, really. It's just, don't expect good sci-fi, expect just a fun, weird one. You kind of get a kick out of it. Destiny of the Daleks, I still find somewhat enjoyable. Like, I feel like the cast are really good. And although it never could top Genesis, it could be a lot worse. You know, it could just be another. It could be another rehash of, you know, the Daleks and Planet of the Daleks. You know, it's got some stuff going for it. Nightmare of Eden as well. I feel it's just kind of there, you know, in all the craziness of the rest. Nightmare of Eden's just, you know, just kind of there. It's not really talked about very much. I think it's pretty good. As for the rest, Horns of Nimon is just ridiculous. And Creature from the Pit. I feel it's sort of a recurring joke in this podcast now.
Yes, the Creature from the Pit moment. Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
Indeed.
And Sharda's okay. I feel it gets more of its legacy from its reputation, perhaps, more than maybe the actual story. It's really good, and it looks really good after Horns of Nimon, but yeah, I don't think it's as good as City of Death or Pirate Planet.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, I think I might have said it before in the podcast, but I feel like the scene in whichever episode of Horns of Nimon it is where Tom Baker's in the TARDIS being completely nonsensical, making some device that's making ridiculous noises, and he's just kind of talking to camera. It's like just the whole production team kind of lost. Like Tom Baker was like, I don't even care anymore. I'm just gonna do whatever I like in the TARDIS because I'm getting nothing to do in this story, and it's terrible. And it's just I feel like it epitomizes this period of Doctor Who in like one 5-minute sequence that's just completely ridiculous.
He's giving K9 the kiss of life in one scene after his head goes backward. And then as he's fixing the TARDIS, it just, as you said, it makes cartoon noises. And he just goes, that is really odd. Wouldn't you say that odd, K9? And K9 just goes, odd, not computable. And I think that just perfectly sums it up. Yeah, you're absolutely right.
I mean, I don't fundamentally hate season 17. Like, I think there is, as we've said, there's some fun stuff in there. Obviously, City of Death is the obvious great story, and Sharda, as you say, is pretty good too. I feel like Sharda might be. I feel like it drags on a little bit. I think the 6-part version helps it, but it does still drag on a little bit, particularly in the later episodes. I find it just you just kind of. Yeah, it just goes on. I mean, that's 6-part Doctor Who to an extent, but I feel like that's a bit of a problem. And then we've said about Creature from the Pit, Destiny of the Daleks. I just feel like it's just kind of a Dalek story that's there. Like, you know, you've got some really good ones like Genesis, like Eve of the Daleks, Power of the Daleks, Remembrance of the Daleks, and then you've got Destiny that it's got Davros in it, so that's cool, although it's the kind of not good version of Davros. You know, it's not the original Michael Wisher version, it's not the Terry Malloy version, it's the David Goodison one-off version, which I don't want to say he's terrible, like he's not. I just think he's the weakest portrayal of Davros that we've had, which, you know, doesn't help the story when Davros is such a central part of it. And
that's so funny. Oh, sorry to put you up. One thing I forgot to mention, as it came to Davros, when he makes his big return, you know, this is meant to be the one of, if not the biggest enemy of Doctor Who. He comes out, and immediately Tom Baker is just like, have a jelly baby. And Davros smacks out, and then proceeds to push Davros about like as if he's a wheelie bin. And I'm just like, this is supposed to be the most evil man in the universe, and he's been reduced to this.
Yeah. I think that kind of shows you just the kind of perspective that Douglas Adams had on what he wanted to do with Doctor Who, because that sort of stuff, you know, Douglas Adams would have certainly influenced his script editing of the season. And it was kind of like, rather than playing up a big moment or playing into the significance of, you know, the return of Davros, he's almost choosing instead to undercut it for comedy by throwing in a comedic line in what's meant to be a really, you know, significant, serious moment. And in general, that probably doesn't work for Doctor Who. That isn't really, you know, sure, it probably works for Hitchhikers, but that's meant to be a bit of comedy, whereas I don't think it really works in Doctor Who. Yes, Charlie, go for it.
I was just going to say, I did pick this up, you know, after watching 17 and 18 back to back.
Yeah.
I feel Douglas Adams does with season 17 what Bidmead did to season 18. Douglas Adams made it too comedic, whereas Bidmead took pretty, you know, fantastic scripts and made them a little bit too science fiction nonsensy.
Yes, he was too obsessed with complex scientific ideas and theories, which suddenly just you end up, you know, confused trying to follow stories when they're talking about entropy and we're in E-space, and it's all just a bit nonsensical, isn't it? So yeah, I can definitely see that perspective. But coming on to the Blu-ray release itself, I mean, I have watched a reasonable amount of it, fundamentally really enjoyed it. I think it's another great, you know, release. I can't decide whether it's one of the best releases or not. Like, I didn't feel like there was necessarily as much new content on this release. Sure, there was a few documentaries and we had the new version of Sharda. And like, it's not to say that any of the releases are bad. I just feel like some of the previous ones we might have got, or it felt like at least that we got more new content on the Blu-ray release. I don't know. Did either of you guys have that perspective, or did you just enjoy it?
Well, I think there was a decent amount.
Yeah.
And I'm sure I don't think there was as much when compared to something like, say, season 24, where they did add a lot of new stuff to it. I think this is a fair amount. I would have liked to have more new documentaries on Creature from the Pit and Horns of Nine, and mainly Horns of Nimon. And I don't think Horns of Nimon still has any documentary about.
No,
really,
there's not a lot. Yeah.
And it is kind of a shame just to hear what the thought process was as they were making that story. But I guess it is what it is, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, I do wonder if it's a similar problem they had with, I know with Nightmare of Eden, that doesn't have a proper making of from the DVD range or now, and that's essentially because nobody wanted to come on and talk about it. Like, I think they could get about 3 people who were in it or are working on it to actually come and talk about it. So that's why it's only like a 10-minute sort of featurette rather than a proper making of, because it was such a disaster and a mess, and the director left halfway through, didn't he? That no one wants to talk about the horror show that was Nightmare of Eden, at least off screen. Even though I don't think it's that bad on screen. But yeah, let's work our way kind of chronologically through the various features that were new for the Blu-ray. So we won't cover the DVD stuff so much because it's been out for most of the DVD. I mean, City of Death's been out since 2005. I realised it's been a very, very long time ago that got its DVD release. But yeah, the first new feature was a big, long, on-location making of documentary for Destiny of the Daleks called Return to Skaro, which we saw a Dalek out in the quarry where they shot Destiny of the Daleks. They got a Dalek model out there as well, which I thought was a really cool, just adds a bit of atmosphere to a documentary, because in many ways it was your kind of classic talking heads making of documentary where we're discussing between actors and cast, talking about stories from the production and whatever. But at least if you've got this kind of new footage from on location with the Dalek, I feel like that just kind of keeps it that little bit more interesting than it maybe otherwise would be. I don't know, Charlie, what did you think of the new documentary for Destiny?
It was quite interesting, to be honest. I do, unless I really like the story or there's something significant about it, like I'd definitely watch one for Creature from the Pit or something. Mm-hmm. Then talking head documentaries are a bit boring. I feel they are a little bit dragged out lots of the time. But since they did get the Dalek on location, I think what you said, it does add a bit of extra intrigue. Like when they for the Web of Fear special edition, when they went to the London Underground, that was interesting. It added a bit more to it, and it's just nice hearing about the production. Really, it always is, and I don't think it felt too dragged out. Maybe I didn't like pick up my phone or something. It was engaging enough for the time it had.
Yeah, exactly. What about you, Ryan? What was your feelings on this doc?
In a way, very similar to Charlie. I thought it was a good documentary. It definitely helped that this story had a documentary, well, considering that it didn't have one previously. Mm-hmm. So knowing more about the behind the scenes of this story did help it, and it did help make things a little bit more sense. They explained like the reason why the Daleks and Daleks looked as tatty as they were was because those were the only props that the BBC had at the time, and they didn't have enough money to renovate them or to repair them, which is why they looked as shabby as they were. And I'm kind of like, well, of course that makes perfect sense. And in a way, this was kind of during the winter. This was set during the period of the winter discontent, as it was during the late 70s, when there were huge budget cuts and budget problems and strikes happening at the BBC. And so hearing this about the Daleks kind of helped make things more sense. And it was interesting just hearing about how that Terry Nation was flirting about with the idea of doing crossover, having the Daleks in Blake 7.
Yes, that was really interesting. Yeah.
And it's got me weirdly fascinated to know if it would have ever really have worked out. But then again, they got Colin Baker and Blake Seven, so who am I to
True.
judge?
I mean, would then Blake Seven universe be canon within the would it all be in the same universe then? Do we think?
Exactly,
That'd be
and Big
interesting.
Finish does, yeah,
I mean-
Big Finish does Blake Seven, so and then so there's the connection there.
That would technically make EastEnders Doctor Who canon, though.
True. Dimensions in time. Yeah, it's best not to think. I mean, some days Dimensions in time is canon. Some days it's not for me. Is how I look at it.
I think we can all need to agree that EastEnders should never ever be canon to anything, and just leave it in it.
Yes.
I mean, Dimensions in Time. I'm now getting weird PTSD flashbacks from watching it. So.
I feel like we'll have to do a podcast purely on that story. I think, won't we? At some point in the future.
I think that's going to break me. I think if I watch it again, my brain is going to bubble out of my ears. Anyway, and also it was funny enough. I think this was in the documentary, or it might have been on the commentary, that Terry Nation apparently allegedly delivered no more than a very thin script outline that just basically rehashed old Dalek stories and ideas.
Yeah.
And, even though it's credited as written by Terry Nation, it's a little bit of a misnomer, since I think most of it was really done by Douglas Adams. I mean, Terry Nation sort of delivered the outline and just was just like, okay, Douglas, you do the rest, which I think is very interesting, and probably why it explains why it's as weird and bizarre and as comedic as it was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. It's you always got the impression with Terry Nation that in the early days he was quite committed to Doctor Who, but later on he kind of, almost was like doing the minimum to get a paycheck, just dining out on the Daleks. I don't know, maybe that's a bit of a sweeping statement, but you just get that impression that like he was like, I've got the Daleks, so I've got all the money in the world for it. And I can just throw any script at them and they'll use it because it's got Daleks in it. And then clearly they've, gone, actually, you can't just make. We already did it in Planet of the Daleks, where you just rehash the first 4 Dalek stories. You're not doing it again, was clearly their perspective. And so you get at least, I guess I don't think, do you feel like there's any direct comparisons to previous Dalek stories? Or do we feel like this is at least a sort of original idea, if nothing else?
And I mean, even though rewatching Destiny, it is a little bit like, okay, they're in a war with a race of robots, which is kind of a rip-off from The Chase, where at the end of The Chase, they were at war with a race of robots and using humans to mine stuff. That's some Dalek invasion of Earth. And, of course, the Doctor on a wonton Skaro, confronting Davros in a ruined city, Genesis of the Daleks. It just feels like, we've got all these other stories. What do we need this one for? It's just... I think it kind of makes rewatched it, especially when compared it to the other Dalek stories that did these ideas and done them so in some degrees much better. It just kind of makes the old Destiny a bit pointless. Maybe that's just me.
It does feel a bit like a prologue to Resurrection, maybe.
Yeah, especially when it sets up everything that's going on with the Magellan virus and Davros getting released and the Daleks needing him to try to bring him back to solve a problem for them.
They like to rehash that idea, don't they? Them trying to rescue Davros for various different reasons. I feel like that's quite a common thread in future Dalek stories.
Yeah, I feel like the only time it got it kind of right was in modern Doctor Who, when Dalek Khan went back to rescue Davros from the Time Lord to help save the Dalek race, even though Khan was kind of a bit of a double agent. It was revealed that even though he saved Davros, he kind of needed Davros to bring all this to bring about the end of the Dalek race by this other Doctor. I feel like that may have been the only time it got it right in terms of the Daleks needing Davros for something. But yeah, it's just with this story, I just feel like it was just kind of like, oh, that's from that story. This is from this story. It's a shame watching it back that I was able to point all this stuff out, and in a way, hearing that Terry Nation only delivered that out, just a brief outline, just kind of sums it up, really. And it's a shame considering that he did Genesis, which I feel like he did care more about, because at least he was doing something different, but it just feels like he's kind of. I feel like that he just kind of gave up after that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that was kind of his last bit, wasn't it? Delivering this outline, and then there wasn't a lot more from Terry Nation to come after that. But that was the Return to Skaro documentary, which I thoroughly enjoyed. I think it's definitely worth a watch. And so next for me was one of the highlights of this box set, actually, which was the Douglas Adams documentary, which was on the City of Death disc, I think it was, wasn't it? Which is a sort of 50-minute or so kind of just biography, retrospective documentary about Douglas Adams' life. Obviously his work on Doctor Who, but also everything else he did, mainly Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and the likes. Had some very interesting people on there. You had John Lloyd, who was one of the producers, the main guy he worked with to create Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, basically, and produced that for radio. And so it was very interesting to get a perspective from a guy who was very, very close to him through that period of his life. Also interesting to get quite famous people like Richard Dawkins on for it as well, which I thought was quite interesting. And I don't know, it just gave I sort of knew a bit about Douglas Adams. We've all, heard the stories about his love for, putting a load of comedy into Doctor Who, the story of him writing City of Death being locked away over a weekend and writing it. And, we've heard those ones, but I thought it was interesting to learn more about, some of the challenges that he faced, and that probably he wasn't ever really cut out to be a script editor. Like, he wasn't really kind of dedicated enough to the work. Like, it just wasn't his mindset. He wasn't able to work like that. And so, yeah, I just thought it was a really, a documentary that wasn't afraid of shying away from some of the negative aspects of him as a person. Not that he was, a bad person in any way, just that maybe the Doctor Who job he ended up in, well, he wasn't really suited to. And as they say, he'd suddenly become a millionaire doing Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. So it was almost like he didn't really need the job on Doctor Who. And he wasn't pretty suited to it that well either. And so it sort of just created that rather complex situation in his life, which I thought was really, really well explored in the documentary, alongside, obviously, the impact his death had on the various people as well. But yeah, Ryan, what did you think of the Douglas Adams doc?
I thought this was easily the best new documentary of the box set. Yeah. It really perfectly summarises both the strengths and the weaknesses that Douglas Adams had when he was a script editor on Doctor Who. In a way, it kind of perhaps sums up, also relates back to maybe the faults of season 17 a bit, because, as I said, he wasn't cut out to be, even some people involved said he wasn't perhaps cut out to be a script editor. They said, I've got a quote here, that he said that he was a difficult person to get scripts out of, and that he wasn't that well organised, which really sums up the fact that he doesn't, as a script editor, he doesn't really have the way of tightening up scripts, and in choosing to lard them with silliness. And they even said that he encouraged actors to ad-lib as much as they want, even if it served a function to the plot, regardless if it did. And yeah, it just, I think it does also say, like, he had all these big dreams of wanting to do other stuff and wanting to sell Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy to the Americans, wanted to dreamed of making this big movie, which after his death, they did end up making it in 2005. And even Christopher Hamilton Bidmead even showed up in this documentary, saying that when he took over from script editor, he said that he was reluctant because he thought it had become too silly and highlighting all the issues that he had with the show, saying that silly was Douglas's keyword, so to speak, and which is a little bit much, considering this is the guy who I think is too sciencey. Think definitely hard science is his keyword, and but in a way he doesn't, and I'm glad that in a way he doesn't really speak negatively about Adams. He does have like a mutual respect for him, which I thought was definitely much appreciated. And Lala Ward especially talks about how much of her Doctor Who connection is through Douglas, and how much they had a really close friendship, and how her and Richard Dawkins planted a tree in his memory after he died, which I thought was actually quite moving. I thought this was a really, solid documentary that really cuts to the core of Douglas Adams, as he is as a person, his strengths, his weaknesses, and even said, like, if he had the capability of fully concentrating as a script editor, he could have taken Doctor Who to a new level, like perhaps Russell T Davies did when he brought Doctor Who back. But because of the fact that he was so disorganized and just never could get scripts or books in on time, and was a very difficult person to get scripts out of, maybe it just kind of shows that perhaps he wasn't best suited to take over script editor after Anthony Reid left. But who knows? I mean, but then again, he when he took over script editor, he helped Doctor Who get us that many ratings up during that year, even though ITV was on Channel 4 off the air.
Yes, so it's a debatable highest ever figure for City of Death, isn't it? But it's still true. It's still true. It's still a fact. But Charlie, what did you think of the Douglas Adams documentary?
I did really expect to like this. I did think it would be the highlight. I'm a huge fan of, obviously, well, like every Doctor Who fan is pretty much a fan of Douglas Adams' Doctor Who scripts, as well as for me, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Yeah, it was really, really interesting. I do love it when in these they like properly drill into the detail. Like, they don't just rehash over the same things over and over again like they've done in the DVDs. Like it reminds me of for the season 8 box set, the In Conversation with Katie Manning. It explores, the other parts of their lives that we don't really, they don't really talk about much. It's I just think it's definitely more of an interesting watch than just, he locked himself away in a hotel for a weekend and wrote City of Death, and it's less about Doctor Who per se and more about him, which I think was really interesting.
Yeah, I think it's always good with figures like this, almost when the documentary doesn't focus too much on Doctor Who, because we as fans, we know all the anecdotes about their Doctor Who work generally, and actually it's a lot more interesting to learn more about who the person is, their flaws, why, you can then learn from their upbringing or whatever, why the way they worked in Doctor Who was the way it was. We're going to get to that in lots of different documentaries about different people, and so I think that's just where this documentary is really successful in doing that. And I think it's definitely one I'd go back to at some point in the future as well when I come around to watching season 17 again. I certainly would stick this documentary on again, because I think it's just a thoroughly interesting insight into a complex man who, as they said in the documentary, he definitely lost too early. I would have been fascinated to see Douglas Adams' perspective on New Who. Like, I don't know whether they would have got him on to write an episode. I mean, can you imagine him writing an episode of New Who? I think it would have been very interesting. I mean, I don't know. I feel like writing like a series 4 David Tennant, Catherine Tate script by Douglas Adams. I feel like that would be like, it would be very Douglas Adams, comedy heavy, but I feel like that could really, really would have worked so well if he'd been around to be able to do something like that. So it's a shame that we never had that opportunity. But for me, one of the highlights of the box set, and I think it was for you guys as well. So next we come on to a couple of features which actually only use archive interviews and footage to kind of create them, which are the Remembering Creature documentary, or sort of mini documentary about Creature from the Pit, and also the Lull Award season 17 just sort of conversation thing that she did as well. So for that first one, features 3 archive interviews from, I think, about 15 years ago or so now. With it's Matt Irvine, the special effects guy. It's Christopher Barry, the director. And can you remember the other person was on this? I can't actually remember who it was.
The writer.
Yes, that was it. Yes, and they were. It's not really a making of documentary. It's more just kind of like, here's what I remember about the production of Creature from the Pit, and obviously reminds us how much of like a lot of 1617 was, how difficult it was, about how impractical and ridiculous the idea of Erato was, and how that all just completely fell apart as a concept. And when they were shooting it, how almost embarrassed they were to be shooting Erato, because they knew it was awful, it looked terrible. They were fully aware of it, but they had no other alternatives. They had to do it. So I thought, I felt like I learned a couple of new things. It was a fairly, simple feature of just a few interviews put together, but I still felt it was reasonably interesting. I mean, Charlie, did you get anything new from this little feature?
I think it was an okay special feature, not like the highlight of the box set or anything, but these things always do make me appreciate how at least they persevere with a budget of, I mean, probably not very much. It does make me think, at least they tried. It's
Yeah.
better than just cancelling Doctor Who because it had such a low budget. At least they persevered.
Yeah, and I love we see it throughout 95% of Doctor Who. There's always ambition. Doctor Who generally never plays it really safe. Even in this series, they go for the massive, ridiculously sized errata that's never going to work as a monster because they haven't got the money for it. But they still go for it and do it because why not? And I think that can be seen. I mean, I think that's a lot of the Graham Williams era, to be fair. There's a lot of ambition in some of the stuff they do, but it was almost some of the worst period for the budgets for them. And it really shows, particularly later in the seasons. But I love that they at least have ambition for it. But yeah, Ryan, your favorite story, Creatures from the Pit. What did you think about the little feature about it?
I thought this was a decent documentary, but I just feel like in comparison to the other documentary that was obviously released before the DVD, Team Errata, which perfectly sums up all the mishaps they had of creating that monster, and just hearing some of the hilarious things that they had to go through. Yeah. I just don't think it quite measured up to that. I feel like I kind of knew some of this stuff before because of that brilliant documentary that perfectly sums up everything. But I did learn some new things, like David Fisher saying how it was kind of a difficult story to write because of the fact that Douglas Adams wanted to have more humor injected into it, and the fact that the film all the scenes that were shot on film were done at Ealing Studios because none of the sets at the normal BBC studios were big enough to film the jungle scenes, and which, to be fair, even though I do mock Creature from the Pit, the jungle settings do look amazing. I will say they do look really impressive.
And well, if you're watching on YouTube, we will have seen that I can't hide little cuts in the video anymore. So our Zoom call ran out. So that's why Ryan got cut off there. But Ryan, carry on with your thoughts on the Creature from the Pit little documentary feature we had.
Well, and I do think with Creature from the Pit, watching the documentaries, I just watch it again. I will say, I don't think it's necessarily a bad story, and there are points where it does look great, especially with the film's scenes with the jungle and everything. And it's just its big problem is it's just the fact that it just got unfortunately saddled with the worst monster in Doctor Who history.
I think that's pretty much sums it up, doesn't it? Like, I don't think that Creature from the Pit. I don't think it's an awful actual Doctor Who story. Like, there's some interesting elements in there. It's I'm not saying it's classic Doctor Who, but it's not bad. You just get towards the end of the story, you see Errata, and you just really have to take a big, deep breath and suspend your disbelief more than most other Doctor Who stories require you to do to really take it seriously. Or you just laugh at it. Also, that is another option, which may be just as good an option, quite frankly.
I think everyone needs to take a real deep breath and collect themselves, both before and after that moment when Tom grabs the end of that thing and gives it a damn good blow. I still can't believe they got it past the BBC censors. I think they did that on purpose. They should have cut it out. If they were followed by any rules of decency or appropriateness for children, they would have cut it out. But I bet they included it on purpose, and I bet Tom Baker did that on purpose. I don't think that was in the script. I think he just came up with it on the spot, and I can't blame him. And even on that DVD documentary that they included here, they even mentioned that Tom Baker especially was having a right good old time with that monster.
Oh, I'm sure he was. I'm sure he was having great fun on the set. I mean, what else could you do apart from have a laugh about it, I suppose? And well, apparently it was, whereas some violent scenes were too bad for Mary Whitehouse. This was no problem to Mary Whitehouse back in the day, apparently, when I would say it might be even more questionable than some of the stuff we saw in the Hinchcliffe era, which caused lots of issues. So yeah, that's quite interesting. But yeah, that was that little feature. The other archive feature on this release, incorporating an archive interview, was the season Lal Award discussion about season 17, which is a documentary from, I think, 2000, or an interview from 2007, which was, bits of it were used for the A Matter of Time documentary, which was is included in the set now, was originally on the Rebos operation, I think. and is basically just the kind of era retrospective documentary about the Graham Williams era. And clearly they sat Lala down for 3 hours and made her talk about all of her Doctor Who for ages, because this is like nearly an hour long, and this is only on kind of season 17 and, you know, stuff that was going on around the time of season 17. And so as much as it is, you know, a rehashed interview from 15 years ago, actually, I found it thoroughly enjoyable and interesting. I mean, sure, there were some, you know, anecdotes that we've heard before, but I feel like we're kind of getting to that point in, you know, Doctor Who documentaries and stuff where inevitably you're going to hear some anecdotes you've heard before, because there's only so many to tell, and some actors and actresses just love to tell the same anecdotes. But I still felt like, you know, that she covered off all the stories she was in. I think, you know, talking about the challenges of doing, you know, Creature from the Pit, her sort of thought her performance was very different to what it was in her other stories. And she was more, I think, didn't she say she was more like the first Romana, the Mary Tan Romana, and then kind of created her own character a bit more from Destiny of the Daleks onwards, because that's when they shot them. And so it's interesting to kind of then look at Creature from the Pit and see, actually, yeah, maybe her portrayal of the character and the outfit she had and everything was more the Mary Tan Romana than what really Lala's Romana sort of became. There's a little bit of a conversation about the stuff with, you know, getting married to Tom Baker, but you kind of got the impression she didn't really want to talk about that too much. I felt like she was kind of dodging it a little bit where she could. But yeah, Charlie, did you learn anything new? Do you have some interesting takes from this little interview?
Yeah, I do understand what you're saying about how, you know, there's only so many anecdotes, so much information about the production that, you know, we're all like massive Whovians. We you know, probably know most of them. Yeah, it was an interesting interview. I personally, I do prefer hearing like people who worked part of the crew of the story, like the directors, producers, writers. Although, you know, it was still really interesting. I think most of the actors do, you know, are very like well spoken. Like, you know, they can, you know, talk about it for a while, and it's, you know, they maintain it, and it's pretty interesting. So I don't actually think I watched all of this.
It was pretty long. It's like 55 minutes, I think.
Yeah, but yeah, I did watch most of it, and yeah, it's really enjoyable. And obviously, what you were saying about her talking about, you know, the progression of her character, because obviously she hadn't really characterized, you know, the second incarnation of Romana. So you know, her only template was obviously Mary Tam, who, you know, looking at the scenes in the Creature from the Pit where she was in the that like hut, the tent place with those barbarians, you know, she was basically just playing Mary Tam's Romana. So yeah, all of that was really interesting as well.
Yeah, certainly felt like I learned something new from that. And it's interesting you say about how it's often more interesting to hear from the sort of crew and directors and writers rather than the cast themselves, because usually the actors just go, oh, we had great fun filming out on location, it was great fun with all these actors in the hotel, I remember having a great laugh in the pub, blah blah blah, which is all fun and nice, but doesn't actually give you any real substance to kind of how the production came together and any issues. And they're almost maybe less likely to be critical of it than sort of the crew who works on it. Remember, actually, oh gosh, that was awful. Maybe you guys were having fun filming out on location, but we were having a horrible time. And so I do think, and I feel like Lala was generally fairly positive about season 17 and just talked about how she, you know, enjoyed doing it with Tom and how it was generally great fun. And I'm like, I'm sure it was for you, but there was also quite a lot of people who it was a bit of a nightmare for, a nightmare of Eden. But it's, I don't know. It was just quite an interesting feature that I thought. I mean, Ryan, what did you think about it?
Well, funnily enough, with Nightmare of Eden, and she does briefly touch up upon it, where she recalls an incident where the director Alan Bromley repeated something like 6, 7, 8 times over the microphone, and Tom was just like, "What is he saying?" And after the last time, Tom just picks up a megaphone and he's just like, can somebody please tell me what it is he's wanting? I'm getting psittacosis listening to that parrot, which was one of many incidents between Tom and that director. And so I think it kind of perhaps shows up the atmosphere from that story. But yeah, with this interview, she does touch upon some very interesting little tidbits about the fact that she was very much in support of the sort of the comedic humour of Douglas Adams, most likely because they were close friends, and he gave her a lot of freedom to ad-lib and provide as much comedy when needed. And although she does understand how people may be critical of it, and they were perhaps used to the seriousness of it, even though from her perspective, she felt like she was coming into it as if it was a children's program. They were making it for children, and how Tom sort of, in a way, kind of changed his performance as it goes on, because he feels like children are watching this. I'll need to appeal to children more to show that adults can be as childlike as well children. And so it was definitely an interesting talk. Listen about her perspective of working on season 17, even though I kind of heard some of it before on the Graham Williams retrospective documentary that was released on the Reboss operation.
Yeah.
It was still definitely a fascinating to watch. I did, like you, I found it very entertaining.
Yeah, exactly. I think it was it probably was a little bit long. I feel like I was kind of looking at my phone a bit towards the end and wasn't paying 100% attention, just because it was a very long, just one interview sort of thing. Often that sort of length thing would be a talking heads with lots of different people, but it was just Lala the whole time. And so that kind of dragged towards the end. But, there's still lots of interesting stuff in there. Some of it rehashing, but also some interesting new insight as well. And so the next kind of big new feature was the what became quite poignant in conversation, Matty Sweet in conversation, which this time was with Bob Baker, which kind of had added significance from when they first announced it, because of course Bob Baker passed away between them recording this in conversation and the release of this box set and saying, "Me able to watch this." I did wonder if they were going to add a little note at the end of some sort, kind of, saying in remembrance of Bob Baker. I was kind of slightly surprised they didn't, but, it certainly added poignancy to the line when Matthew Sweet mentions to Bob about how he's the, final surviving writer, or the earliest surviving writer of Doctor Who from, I think the last one's from the 70s. And, he's quite sort of stumped by that, almost, I think, a bit taken aback by that fact. And, it really sort of adds, a tinge of sadness to know now he's not that, because he's no longer with us. But I'm not quite sure how I feel about this one. I don't think it's one of the best in conversations we've had so far. I think there was some good stuff in there, but I certainly felt like earlier on it sort of, Bob was kind of going on and on a bit, and it felt like Matty Sweet was kind of trying to bring him back onto topic every time, almost not letting him get to the point he wanted to get to. He was kind of cutting in and going, yeah, well, what about when you met Dave Martin? And let's get to when you met Dave Martin. When he's trying to give a bit of background on his, his childhood, his life and stuff. And I felt like Matty didn't quite give him enough kind of time to kind of do that. And there were just a few moments where you felt like Bob was a bit kind of, I don't know, frustrated. I don't know if that's the wrong word. I don't know. He just didn't seem, wholly relaxed all of the time during the interview, which I guess is, he's not an actor. He's probably not used to it in quite the same way. But I just thought that was slightly noticeable. As much as there was a lot of interesting stuff we learnt there about, some of these sort of, I think, a theatre production that he did I'd never heard of about Vietnam and stuff, which sounded really, really interesting. Obviously, a bit of perspective on the Wallace and Gromit stuff as well, and alongside all of his Doctor Who endeavours. And, some of the notable, I think there was, it sort of seemed like Matthew touched the nerve with his comment about the sort of nickname that Terence Dix, I think, had for him back in the day, or had for the Bristol boys back in the day. You sort of got the impression that he didn't necessarily love the nicknames that they got given, even though he maybe wouldn't come out and explicitly state it. And so, yeah, I thought it was, a fairly interesting conversation, with one of the writers who, I don't think he's written any of my favourite Doctor Who stories, like the combo. I don't think they're ever awful. I just don't think any of them would be like my, absolute favourites. But yeah, Ryan, what was your perspective on this conversation?
I thought it was a decent conversation. I don't think it holds up to the other Matthew Sweet interviews. I mean, I still think the Tom Baker one from season 12 is still a high point for me. It definitely doesn't reach that. I think it dragged on a bit longer than it should have done. I feel like it could have easily been cut down a bit more, but it was interesting hearing, his different working relationships with Dave Martin, and then how he then transitioned to working with Nick Park when they started working on Arm and Animations, and it was interesting hearing the different working relationships. I mean, he says that Dave Martin could type; he could do the typing well. I couldn't, and it was definitely interesting. Although I do agree, it does drag on a bit, and as I mentioned, that does lead to perhaps made it go on longer than it should have done. But it was definitely interesting, sort of like his different sort of viewpoints on the different stories. Like you said about Claws of Axos, about he wanted it to be about false advertising, and when looking at it, it kind of sort of is if you look deeply, and it's kind of like, oh, he does provide some different vectors. And as far as him as a writer is concerned, I do think he's written, for me, he's done like 3 enjoyable stories. I think Claws of Axos, Sontaran Experiment, and especially the 3 Doctors, I think they are solid stories. The others, though, I can't really say I'm a fan of. But
not so much.
I do think it was a decent documentary, although watching it, as you mentioned, it was a bit sad watching it, considering that hearing the news that he unfortunately passed away. Yeah, it was a little bit sad after watching it.
Yeah, and I thought it sort of added extra poignancy to that lovely final little scene where they got K9 to meet Gromit, didn't they? Which I thought was just, a great bit of fun, kind of worlds colliding in that sense, and having, Bob watch on there, I thought with Matthew was just a really fun and an extra poignant moment, I thought, to sort of end the little feature on. But yeah, Charlie, what did you think of this conversation?
This was a really, really, I really did like it. I've not got all of the Blu-ray box sets. I've only got 8. I've only got the 3 ones released in 2021. But I feel I don't have much to compare this with, but I feel it was quite interesting. I feel he's, it's not like he's Douglas Adams and he's written 3 really well-loved Doctor Who stories. He's one of the more divisive writers. Obviously, we were talking about 3 Doctors the other day, which I do find a bit mixed. Claws of Axos, though, I do love. Invasion of Time was a fantastic 4-parter.
No, the last 2 parts are the best bit. What are you talking about? Running around the TARDIS with Sontarans. It's great fun. I love it. Anyway, I'm sure you guys don't, but that's me. Sorry, carry on.
Armageddon Factor. I'm a bit mixed on.
It drags on forever.
Yeah. It's he's one of the more divisive writers. Although, I do think it was an interesting documentary. I feel, compared to the Katie Manning one from the season 8 box set, which I've also watched recently, I feel it feels a bit less like lighthearted and cozy, because there were a few times where, like you said, it felt a little bit tense, because obviously he's not an actor and he's not done as many like press things. He's not as used to it, maybe, like you said. Although generally it was pretty interesting. Yeah,
absolutely. I think in general it was a thoroughly interesting listen, and there was definitely some new stuff we learned there about different stuff. That sort of his perspective, I thought was interesting to hear that kind of he really enjoyed Doctor Who, but Dave Martin always just kind of used it as a way of making some money to go and do more interesting things, which I thought was interesting. And what I'd never thought about before was the fact that because there's 2 writers, they got paid half the paycheck each, which, he was earning half the money for doing a script for Doctor Who that anybody else was. So I'd never thought about it. I just thought that was quite an interesting point as well. So overall, a fairly interesting documentary, and certainly something I at some point in the future I'll probably watch it again, but I think it'll probably be a little while. And then one of my other favourite features of this box set was something which I didn't really know what to expect going in, was the Tom Talks feature, which kind of on the surface of it, you're like, is this going to really be interesting or really have any point to it? And actually, I thought it was thoroughly enjoyable. I mean, obviously Tom Baker is an interesting man, and to basically give him some very tenuously linked to season 17 discussion points, like they were very tenuous. They were kind of just to get him to give anecdotes about his life. But actually, the anecdotes I thought were fascinating. Like, it was really interesting hearing all his stuff about being brought up in a church, and his sort of perspective on religion and stuff that he started off discussing. And then, the stuff about being on Blackadder, wasn't it, with Rowan Atkinson, and kind of I kind of felt like I'd heard that anecdote before, but I don't know. I couldn't decide whether I'd heard about him, Rowan Atkinson getting really mad at Tom Baker, or being really, annoyed by Tom Baker and things. I don't know if I'd heard that before or not.
I think I heard about it in a Radio Times interview that Tom gave. I think he mentioned the story there, but actually hearing it in full here, it does add a bit more to it, I feel, because having also rewatched the Blackadder 2 episode he was in, I do think it's one of the best episodes of Blackadder ever. I still can't get Tom Baker being long on beard, short on legs, and of course he famous line, I know I'm only a bluff old cove with no legs and a beard that you can lose a badger in. And all that, it's just so brilliant and enjoyable. And it's so sad to hear that his experience was the complete opposite. The fact that Rowan, in particular, well, specifically Rowan, was against Tom Baker being Tom Baker's, and he wanted it to tone it down and make him boring, just perhaps not to overindulge, maybe not to upstage him, who knows? And the directors are being like, ignore what Rowan says. He says this to every actor who comes in, just do you. And because of that, Rowan didn't speak to Tom ever again after that. And even Tom himself mentioned the fact that he kind of stuck with him, and it still stuck with him, and the fact that he's still a little bit disheartened by it, which kind of is a real shame, because, as I said, he was the standout in that brilliant Blackadder episode, and it was still sad to hear that he had a kind of a horrible, tough time on it.
Yeah, exactly, and I do think this was, you know, you've got Tom in a very sort of reflective mood almost. I feel like through the kind of DVD and into the Blu-ray range, we've seen many different sort of iterations of almost Tom being interviewed. You kind of had the earlier days of the DVD range where he was almost like taking the mick out of anything and cracking as many jokes as possible in every single thing he had to say about any story he worked on or whatever. He'd just be sort of playing it all for the laughs in interviews. And I feel like now we've kind of reached that stage. He's got a bit older and he's a bit more kind of still like fun and making jokes, but in a more sort of reflective and sort of reminiscing almost kind of way. And I think it was in this feature, wasn't it, where he talks about how, you know, he doesn't want to die, basically, that he's not, you know, he doesn't really want to, he's not really looking forward to the idea of going. He's not really, you know, content with that. I thought that was quite an interesting reflection for him to kind of own up to on a you know, a little interview like that. It's sort of quite a personal thing, I guess. So a feature like this, it sort of really feels like you're getting kind of an insight into Tom Baker as a person that bit more, and learning more things about his life that we didn't know, even though, you know, none of it's really anything to do with Doctor Who. But I thought it was a fascinating listen. I mean, Charlie, what did you think about this feature?
Honestly, I could listen to Tom Baker talk about literally anything.
Yeah, that's literally it.
Yeah, I've heard him being described as like the British Morgan Freeman. He just, you could hear him talk about something for ages. And I do think, like looking at some of the older special features, like on Genesis of the Daleks, I think it was. He does seem to be taking it as a bit of a joke, because obviously he wasn't a fan of his last couple of seasons. But I do feel, you know, now, like you said, he's like a bit older. He's in a more like reflective mood, and you know, he really does just. You know, he could just talk about any random topic. Like, you know, he was talking about some, like, as you said, very tenuous links to season 17. And it's just really interesting to listen to, just because it's Tom Baker. Like, I don't think they could do this with many other Doctor actors and have it be as effective. Yeah,
exactly. And I think, you know, you really just feel that, you know, Tom feels like he's had a great life, and he obviously loved being a part of Doctor Who, and I feel like more than ever he feels that now than maybe he did in the past, when he was a bit, you know, not obviously he always appreciated being on it, but I feel like he appreciates that even more than he ever did. And as you say, I don't feel like a feature like this with Peter Davison would really be that interesting. And that's no slight to Peter. I just don't think that this sort of format of thing would really work with, frankly, as you say, any of the other Doctors. So, you know, I wouldn't mind if, you know, 4 years time, if they do season 13 or something, let's have another one. Why not? Tom Talks Mark II. I'd have another 45 minutes listening to Tom talk about random topics. It's good for me. And well, the final couple of things I want to talk about, well, the big thing to talk about is the new definitive Sharda. The 6-episode version of Sharda, which is supposedly the final ever version of Sharda. But, well, you know, when we're sat here in 5 years' time discussing another version of Sharda, I don't even know how, but another version, you know, a new fully animated version, I don't know. Then, you know, we'll take those words back. But for now, this is the definitive version of Sharda. As I say, a 6-episode version, kind of basically just recutting up the version that they released in 2017, tweaking some of the animation here and there just to kind of tidy it up, improve it a little bit in places. It's nothing, you know, significant, but it just the little bits that are rough around the edges, it improves. I mean, have you guys had a chance to watch the 6-episode version of Sharda?
I have, and I will say it is kind of still the same animation. The only things I've noticed is that they've altered the colours a bit to make it feel a bit more in line with the live action footage. And I did notice that some of the changes, like when we see the first time we see the animation and we see Chris Parsons cycling down Cambridge, we actually see people on the streets as opposed to the previous animation where there was no one on the streets, which I did think was a bit odd back at the time, but I did think that improved it a lot more. And apart from that, it is basically the same, just chopped up into 6 chapters, which does help it. It doesn't completely solve the pacing issues when compared to how tightly constructed City of Death and Pirate Planet were, but in a way, watching this, it does help make it feel more like it's a part of season 17 now that it's split into 6 parts and given its own release on the box set. I do think, in a way, it is sort of the definitive version, but then again, who knows what they could do in 6, 7, 8 years' time.
Well, exactly. We'll probably never know for sure if there's going to be another version of Sharda, but at least for now, we can hope it's the definitive one. Charlie, did you think the cliffhangers worked? Do you know, obviously they chopped it up, which wasn't the original plan when they made this version of it, even if the original script did have cliffhangers in it. Do you think that the kind of way it was split up worked quite well?
I generally, I feel some of the cliffhangers were a bit they're not the stereotypical cliffhangers. They're more just kind of nice ways to end the episode.
Yeah.
But it's not like a monster appears like in, the vast majority of cliffhangers. I do think, the pacing issue, it does sort of solve that, because 2.5 hours, well, in some formats, like, like Marvel or Star Wars films or something, it works brilliantly because they're designed for that format. But since these are literally just 6 episodes that are each their own, tiny story, they can easily be separated. I do feel it's better to have it in a 6-part format. And what you were saying about the animation, I did notice the other people on the street, and just a very light polish that's very subtle, but when you compare it with the 2017 animation, it does look a lot better.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's just the final step up we need to have the version of Sharda I'm always going to go back to now. Whenever I want to watch Sharda again, I think I can't really see myself going to the movie version. I don't see why I would really choose to go back to that over the 6-part version now, because it just feels more like how Classic Who's supposed to be watched, is in the classic episodic format. So I think that's, probably the definitive version for me, at least. And then the final new feature, a feature that we get on all the Blu-rays now, is the behind the sofa features. This edition featured on one sofa, or one of the sort of split up chairs. You had Graham Harper, June Hudson and Matt Irvine. You had Colin Baker and Matthew Waterhouse on another one, and then Katie Manning and Nicola Bryant on another one. So it was quite an interesting mix of people from from the era that it was, and also different eras as well, giving their perspectives on it. Charlie, what did you think of the various behind the sofa features from this box set? Did you think that they were some of the better ones compared to the ones you've seen?
I feel the biggest surprise in this is that Sarah Sutton and Janet Fielding weren't in this one.
They're meant to be shoo-ins for all of them, aren't they?
Yeah, but I do think, I do really love the behind the sofa. I think it's very obviously based off of like Gogglebox and things, which I don't really like, but for Doctor Who, I feel it really works, especially when it's such an extensive show, and these people worked on completely different eras of the show. Even Matthew Waterhouse, who was just a season later, but it was a completely different show at that point. I feel the highlight of this is definitely Colin Baker and Matthew Waterhouse. I feel it's just so fantastic, and I really do respect Colin Baker, because obviously how bad the BBC treated him back in the day, and he still goes on to talk about Doctor Who. I really think that's really nice of him, and obviously he's the split up chairs, not sofa, it's just loads of fun. Even Nicola Bryant and Katie Manning, they were entertaining, and obviously I can't remember all of their names at this point, but the other sofa with the special effects and costume was interesting. Although I do think it would be interesting to mix up cast and crew for some of them. I think that would be quite interesting at times. Maybe for some of the later ones where they're all part of that era. I think that would have been really cool as well.
Yeah, you kind of feel like you've got the sort of actors' sofas where they're giving, their sort of funny comedic jibes about the episode. And then you've got the kind of production sofa where they're kind of just giving that, oh yeah, when I worked on it, I did this and I did that, which is interesting, but it means you very much get more of the kind of informative sofa and then the more entertaining sofas, rather than it kind of being spread across all of it, which I think might work better. I don't know. What about you, Ryan? What did you think about the behind the sofas?
Pretty much echoing what Charlie said. I thought it was a good time. I thought some of the highlights were definitely the Creature from the Pit one, where it was brilliant seeing their reactions to that creature for the very first time. Just Graham Harper bursting out laughing and Matthew Waterhouse just reacting with pure horror.
Yeah.
While Colin is just like, is that a mollusk? It was just absolutely brilliant. Although it's a bit of a shame that they didn't see them react to when Tom Baker does that infamous scene. It's a bit of a shame we don't get a reaction to that. I thought that would have been so hilarious. But
I guess maybe they didn't react to it. I don't know. Who knows what that was? But yes, no, it was a bit of a shame not to get that bit. But still good fun overall, as Behind the Sofa always is. And well, that pretty much brings us to the conclusion of the new features on season 17. Overall, guys, do you think it was an enjoyable box set? Do you feel like, as much as we don't love the stories, at least all the extra content enhances the overall release?
I thought it was definitely a solid box set, and it did help sort of understand more behind the scenes of the season, much more about the limitations they were faced with. And as I said, even though it's not the best season in the world, it's fair to say, it's still, you can't say it's not entertaining, because holy moly. And it's definitely, and as I said at the beginning, coming after Doctor Who Flux, this was definitely and being just frazzled from that. This was the perfect like entertainment I needed. Although, funny enough, very quickly, it's funny how we said about silly stuff in season 17. That infamous bit at the end of Doctor Who Flux with the Sontaran eating the chocolate. Now, I remember I hated that the first time I saw it, but I actually watched that scene again in pure isolation. I laughed my head off. I actually liked that scene. Now I could watch it from the perspective like I watched a season 17 story.
Yeah,
it is so purely entertaining. The fact that eating chocolate is like the equivalent of getting smashed on alcohol for the Sontaran, but it's just so good. I mean, yes, it is ridiculous in context with the rest of the episode, and I still question what kind of paint thinner Chibnall was sniffing when he thought of that scene. But I don't hate that scene like I used to. Maybe everything beforehand just put me in a bad mood, and maybe that's why I didn't react as positively. But I don't really hate that scene anymore. Still hate the rest of the episode, though, but I don't hate that scene now.
Well, there we go. I think that's the biggest piece of news from this whole podcast, to be honest, is that you don't hate the chocolate scene. I think that's the most significant, thing we could have possibly said the whole podcast. But Charlie, season 17 box set overall, an enjoyable one of the three you've got so far?
Yeah, I'd say it perhaps in terms of content quality and quantity, it's probably the lesser of the three released in 2021.
Yeah, I'd agree.
It's still an enjoyable one, though. We've got some great special features on here. I will say the highlight is definitely the Douglas Adams documentary, and probably Behind the Sofa as well. I feel that's a very consistently good one. Like, you know what you're getting with that, and it delivers lots of the time. It's not the best season. I don't actually like it as much as I did before I got the box set, which is kind of the reverse of season 24, really. But yeah, it's always nice to have the box sets, and it gets another divisive, less liked one out the way.
Yeah, exactly. And so, well, we won't have to revisit season 17 anymore. This will be the final discussion about Erato and Creature from the Pit, Ryan. I'm afraid that's it. It's done now. We're putting it in the past.
Bye, Erato. It was definitely interesting knowing you, but it's time to put all that weirdness behind us, I'm afraid.
Well, indeed. And speaking of putting things behind us, it seems that the BBC may well be putting animations behind us because, of course, it's been rumoured that the BBC America are pulling out of animating Doctor Who, and therefore the Abominable Snowmen may well be the final animation in the Classic Who range. Now, this is something that's been rumoured and discussed for a while. So it wasn't a complete surprise to me when I saw this article the other week about it. I know it's not an official announcement, but the person who wrote it, as much as it's for a tabloid, was the person who correctly predicted Evil of the Daleks, Abominable Snowmen, and Galaxy 4. So I feel like they're pretty sure they've got a source inside the BBC team who work on this, so they're probably correct. And it kind of leaves us to question where they're going to go with this. Are they going to look at BritBox or something like that to enable some funding to be able to do these animations? You know, where has it all gone wrong? Why are BBC America choosing to pull out? We don't really know fully. But Charlie, do you think it'd be a real shame to see the animations come to an end, given, you know, it feels like we're really getting into a stride with them now?
Yeah, probably. It does surprise me considering, you know, obviously physical media isn't as popular now as it was 10, 20 years ago, but it's still, you know, like these Doctor Who animations are topping the charts on Amazon. Yep. I remember one time it was quite surreal. It was shortly after Evil of the Daleks was released. I was in Tesco and there was literally like a display of just Evil of the Daleks. Yeah. It was weird. And, you know, so they're obviously popular. I've seen some really like weird comments, people saying like, people have no interest in the classic series because of New Who. Like,
I know.
I wouldn't really say that's true. But yeah, it is definitely sad. Like, I don't think I'm as annoyed about it anymore, perhaps because I have realised just because BBC America have pulled funding doesn't mean they're going to stop. Like you said, BritBox. I've heard people saying it might be BritBox Originals. Perhaps maybe like the Bad Wolf partnership might involve that somehow. I don't know. We'll just have to wait and see. I really hope they do get at least one of them done, you know, in time for like the end of 2023, maybe, if they can work out something. I do think it's a real shame, though, that they haven't done like Crusade, Wheel in Space, and Space Pirates, because that's 3 seasons done. They were so close.
Yeah, exactly. We got so close completing all these seasons, and now we might end up with just reconstructions if they ever do the Blu-ray boxes for them. But Ryan, the end of animations, bad news, isn't it?
Yeah, very bad news. This is really bad. And if it's BritBox, if they're going to be exclusive to BritBox and they don't do Blu-ray releases, I mean, who knows if they will, but if it is solely for BritBox, it's going to be really annoying, especially somewhat for those, well, including me, who don't have BritBox.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of imagine...
I have myself. I don't have BritBox. I'm sorry, BritBox fans.
Oh, we need to get them to sponsor us, though. You need to get it so they can sponsor us. But I would envision that if they were to do them as BritBox originals, they'd probably put them on BritBox and then release a DVD like 3 months later or something, maybe. So you get that initial, if you want to watch it, get BritBox. But if not, then wait and you can get a DVD or Blu-ray. I mean, that's what I hope they do, but you never know.
Yeah, it could. Yeah, as I said, it could end up being like what happened with, well, totally unrelated, but it could be similar to what happened with the film Zack Snyder's Justice League, where they put it out on Sky Cinema, Sky Premiere, I think, when it came out, and then about 2-3 months later, they released it on Blu-ray and 4K, and so there was a physical list. They could end up doing that, but I just don't know how popular it could be because of the fact that there are viewers like me who don't have BritBox, so it's just a case that if you're putting it as a BritBox original first, is that going to be as successful as opposed to releasing it on Blu-ray first, where it's probably more successful? And I just can't help but feel that this news, combined with the whole news what's been going on with the BBC and the government and the license fees and everything, and the whole announcement that Doctor Who is going to be done by Bad Wolf Productions and Sony, I can't help but feel that this is more than just a coincidence that all these news are happening at the same time.
Yeah.
So it is. Doctor Who going forward is going to be very strange.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting times, and well, we're just going to have to wait and see whether animations do return in the future. We've obviously got Abominable Snowmen to look forward to at some point later this year, and then we will simply just have to see where things take us in the future, and hope that, you know, maybe we'll get animations from somebody else or with some other co-production in the future. But until then, we will just have to wait. But that's pretty much all we've got time for in this edition of KerVAM. Just quickly to mention the rumour that had been doing the rounds for the latest collection release. I'd seen, I think the same website that listed Galaxy 4 in Season 17 have suggested that Season 22, Colin Baker's first season, is going to be the next release in the collection range. Charlie, really quick word, Season 22, would you be excited for that?
I'll be excited for the box set. It's like the third season in a row now that they're doing that isn't perceived as a very good one.
Yes.
I'd rather have like season 7, you know, or season 13 or 16 or something like that, you know, or 25. I really want something like that, but they're deciding to do another, you know, controversial, maybe to get them out of the way. I don't know. It will be nice to have Colin Baker's era pretty much completed, although there is, of course, a twin dilemma. But still, exactly. We can forget about that story.
Yeah, I think we should. I think we should just forget about it. Yeah. And Ryan, excited for season 22 if it comes out?
I love Revelation of the Daleks. I like Vengeance on Varos. Do not care less. Don't care for everything else about that series. Just no, they're just. I think that's pretty much all I can say. 2 stories out of all the others are just. It's not a good series. Not a good debut season for Colin, I should say. And as to echo Charlie, I'm more excited about what they could be having for the box set rather than the season itself. Yeah, exactly. I think we can hope for the best from the box set itself. But that's just about all we've got time for in this edition of KerVAM. Please follow us on YouTube, on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts. But from me, from Ryan, and from Charlie, it's goodbye for now.